Morning, everybody. My name is Luke Jensen. I am a geologist with the Pennsylvania Bureau of Abandoned Mine Reclamation. And thank you for coming to my presentation on the Wingfield Pines inflow reconstruction. This is an AMLER success. Now, the Abandoned Mine Land Economic and Revitalization Program has a pot of funds that we've used for the reclamation of abandoned mine lands in conjunction with the economic and community development and reuse goals. And I believe that this project that we went through about 2 or 3 years ago really hits that nail on the head. Now, where we're working at here in southwestern PA, just south of Pittsburgh, in Bridgeville, in the township of Upper St. Clair in Allegheny County, the Wingfield Pines is owned by Allegheny Land Trust. They are a nonprofit organization whose goal is to help local people save local land in the Pittsburgh region. And they have 32 different municipalities that they're doing this in, and they've protected about 3,600 acres and turned them into green space parks all around the area. So each one of these little icons is one of the parks that they own, and the one that we're dealing with is, I believe, this one right there. Now here's a general topo map of the park. The land has seen more than its fair share of uses since it was strip mined in the 1940s and later turned into the Wingfield Pines Golf Course and Swim Club in about the early 1980s. Now that lasted for about 20 years before it closed down because if you've noticed, we have a large river running right here on the west side of it. This whole site here, this green space park, lies about 18 inches above the floodplain of that river. So anytime it would rain heavy, it would get washed out pretty regularly. And now this 87-acre conservation area is made possible by a PADCNR grant, and it's open year-round to hikers, bikers. They have a boat access on site, and all the red lines represent all the hiking trails that they have scattered around the site. And it's a park, but there's no paving, there's no concrete. It's grass walkways, tree plantings, butterfly gardens. It's very open and free use. Now, it lies in the Chartiers Creek watershed south of Pittsburgh, and its floodplain covers about 277 square miles, and it gets about 38 inches of water per year. And the yellow highlighted area is all of the floodplain downstream of Wingfield Pines. And then the red section is the full floodplain with all of the area above it. Now here is a aerial view of the Wingfield Pines passive treatment system. It was built by Head Environmental, and I believe it was finished in roughly 2012. But the red marker down in the bottom right here is the intake structure. It is a spreader pipe that goes horizontally along this first pond and helps out with some aeration. And then it goes into a nice pinwheel structure here where it flows into the first cell, overflows into the second, third, fourth, and then into a large serpentine passive treatment or wetland system. Serpentines through here, and then there is a final polishing pond there and out into Chartiers Creek. And now the discharge point that we're dealing with here is the pink pin up in the top right, and that's where the water actually comes out of the hillside. I believe the total retention time on this is between 40 and 48 hours, and we're averaging about 800 gallons a minute, but the mine that we're dealing with is pretty shallow, so as it rains or is dry, it actually is quite flashy. Now, the coal mines around the Pittsburgh area there's dozens of them. So if you can see, the main deep mine that is providing the water to this treatment system is the Montour number 4 mine, which is this shaded area right there. And it is an absolutely huge deep mine. It was originally, the first shaft opened in 1903 and was operated until the mid-1970s. And it lies on the McMurray syncline, which plays a big role in it later. I don't think you can see too well on that map, but the McMurray syncline, we're right up in here. in this little top right, top left corner, and the McMurray syncline runs this way, northeast to southwest. But everything down here is the rest of that mine pool, and I think it covers several square miles. Now, we're going to go a little bit out of order as far as information that we had at the time of the project, the one I'm presenting to you now. So just north of the Montour number 4, we have the Bridgeville mine. Now, the Montour number 4 ends right about here, and then it picks up with the Bridgeville mine north and northeast of it. And it was owned by the Pittsburgh Coal Company and opened roughly in 1879. Now, the cause of this issue that we had was the intake structure of the Wingfield Pine system had collapsed. Now, if you saw from the graphic earlier, the flow started in the top right-hand corner of the system. The northeast flowed 900 feet to the beginning of the system. And what we didn't know at the time, but what we later found out, was that that collapse of that intake system was caused by a sinkhole. So there is our passive treatment system down here on the left. And up here, about 7,000 feet away, is McLaughlin Run sinkhole. It opened up right in the middle of a stream over top of the Bridgeville mine pool. Now there's a couple maps showing the Bridgeville mine and the location of that sinkhole. Now the added flows from the McLaughlin Run into the deep mine is what caused increased head pressures on the discharge point and caused the opening to collapse around the intake structure. And if you can see, there's a green dot right there. That's actually the exact location of that sinkhole. It swallowed up McLaughlin Run in its entirety, and it took the shafts and entries all the way down to our passive treatment system. Now, the collapse of our intake structure. It was designed as a concrete manway. And what was needed to be done originally was we were using the head pressure from the mine pool to push water up into the manway to a certain elevation where it can then flow downhill 900 feet into the treatment system with enough head pressure to spout water out of the spreader pipe in the beginning. So when we increased the head pressure on that, or when the McLaughlin Run sinkhole increased the pressure on the mine pool, it was too much for the ground to take, and it collapsed all around that manway. You can see on the left, and it opened up the mine shaft into that Montour number 4 mine. You can see we have some mining timbers laying on the side there, and that is, you could see at the right angle, back into the mine pool. So we were directly at its entrance. And now, once this happened, the mine water was fully able to circumvent the treatment system by bypassing directly into the final pond. So what we had was untreated raw mine water discharging directly into Chartiers Creek, which is a major watershed south of Pittsburgh. And where it should have been going to the manway, it was going down this ditch out around and completely ruining the quality of Chartiers Creek. Now here we have a map of the Montour number 4 mine laid over the aerial of Wingfield Pines. Now to fix the system, it was decided that we were going to abandon the old intake structure. We're not going to try to repair it and redo what was already broken, because the exposed mine wall or high wall was right there. It was basically about a 15-foot vertical cliff, and we didn't know the competency of that rock and that mine right along the wall. So abandoning that was our first choice, which was the orange marker there, and we moved it to the screen spot. Now the McMurray syncline is this black line right here. So we decided to move it to the very bottom of the mine, where we knew we could have as much control of the mine pool elevations as possible with no space underneath us where we could lose water. So to get into this low part of the mine pool, we brought in and did some horizontal drilling for our intake structure. It consisted of multiple pipes, all drilled into the mine pool, and we stacked them at different elevations. So if the mine pool was low, because it was very flashy and shallow, one of these pipes would be filled. But as it rained or snow melt happened and the mine pool filled up, it would, in succession, flood more pipes, and increase the flow into the Wingfield Pines. So once we had them drilled and into the system, we decided to start pumping on it to pull that mine pool down. And here we have a picture of the generator we pulled on site. Now this was a big deal because about 100 feet behind the system, we had a very affluent neighborhood, and they were very concerned about noise. So we brought in a lot of baffles and a very quiet generator, and everything worked out really well. So we put in 2 submersible pumps down those horizontal shafts into the mine pool and began to pump away. And to simulate that aeration of those spreader pipes, we turned the end of those pipes up and created a fountain. Oh, it turned it sideways? That's the first time that's happened. So anyway, we fountained this water out into the first pond system to try and start the treatment again as fast as we can. And I don't know how well you can hear, but you can hear the fountain, but you can't hear the generator in this video. And I was basically right in between them. And that was a big point we were all very happy about. So while we were pumping down the mine pool, we had to decide what we were going to do about plugging the old discharge system. What we decided was we were going to go in and grout closed the openings that the water was following into that old intake structure. And that red square is where we decided to put the pad. And we couldn't come in from Wingfield Pines to bring in grouting trucks and drill rigs. It was too narrow, it was walking paths. It wasn't feasible. We buried a couple pickup trucks just trying to get back there at one point. So we had to come in through this nice neighborhood and cut a trail to that drill pad. And here's a quick picture of our drilling plan that we had set up. So here is the discharge point on the bottom left. And then we had 2 shafts and 1 connecting shaft right here. And we had, I think, 8 or 10 holes that we were going to drill and then grout close with concrete. The top of the coal was roughly 85 to 90 feet below the surface, and we had 7 feet of void space, which we found out by a tool drop. Now here's where we hit our first problem. We're pumping down the mine pool, everything's going well. We have our pad made, we drilled our holes, and we realized that we've pumped the water down, according to measurements around the neighborhood, 6 feet below this discharge point. But we're still getting 1,200 gallons a minute of water coming out of this mine pool. Now, we weren't sure if the discharge point was necking the discharge down to the point where we still had a pool in these shafts, so we tried to grout it, and that didn't work. It washed straight out. We had 0 success. So we had no idea where this water was coming from at first. So eventually, we found this map, and this bottom busy part, that's the Montour number 4, and then here is the Bridgeville mine, which I've already told you about. And now there is a thick black line here, which is supposed to represent a border between these 2 mines. That wasn't the case. We found out here, through elevations taken in monitoring wells that we found for the Bridgeville mine, that one of these closed off shafts had to have been mined through, broken, degraded, and water was flowing between the mine pools from the Bridgeville into the Montour and flowing down that shaft, giving us 1,200 gallons a minute average of extra water we couldn't account on. So we decided to inject a highly expanding foam into that discharge. So we put some metal pipes in there, brought some trucks in that we buried, and backfilled it with limestone and gravel to try to neck that flow down to as low as possible. I think we got down to about 50 or 60 gallons a minute after truck filling it with stone, and then filled it with foam until it sealed off and we could create a nice pool for us to actually inject our grout into. And this worked really well. I think the foam, even though the entrance was all broken rock, got us down to about 1 gallon a minute or less. So once we had blocked this off and figured out and was confident it wasn't going to give way, we were able to start working on the new intake. So here's a picture of 2 of the wells into the mine pool and then the connecting pipes. And here's a picture of what it looks like now. I think they drilled 8 wells total into the mine pool, and they stacked all of them in pairs at elevations, and they left 4 of them open in case they wanted to do any monitoring on this deep mine, or if there's any other reason we had to get into this mine later. So we left them in access. Now these pipes here, coming from the mine pool, were fed into an agri-drain box that split an appropriate amount of flow to the system. So there's our agri-drain box in the corner, and then you can see the spreader pipe that we have very nicely spouting water out, creating aeration for us. And then any overflow that the system wasn't designed to handle could flow out a pipe here and down. And the old 900-foot intake pipe was now repurposed to use as our emergency spillway. So I went back a couple months later after everything was plumbed in and functioning. We had a great system again, and I found an immediate return. Now it turns it sideways. This is a picture of ducks flying all over the pond systems. Once those wetlands reflooded, wildlife came back, I think, within a month. It was almost immediate. It was really great to see. So I think the walk that day, I saw, bugs, dragonflies, ducks, geese. It was a multitude. It was really nice to see a project go through and work so well and then have life come back. And this was my favorite part of it. I come back about 2 months later just to make sure everything's working well, and I found a high school class in Chartiers Creek, just downstream of this system. Kids and waders digging around, finding fish. They're part of a Mount Lebanon AP science class, led by their teacher, Mike Gulo, and they had been doing a scientific study of Chartiers Creek's watershed upstream and downstream of Wingfield Pines for about 4 or 5 years now. And they've been doing macro samples and water samples, pH. They came up with their own little, macroinvertebrate rubric here so that they could give themselves a water quality index rating. It was wonderful. So I asked them, could I borrow your data for this? Because it shows wonderful results. So this is when they first started, all the results that they took and their own indexes. And I was mainly paying attention to the macroinvertebrate study, Wingfield Pines upstream, downstream, and then Chemtech is about 4 miles downstream from there. So this is before it happened. They had a macro index of 6 above and 3 below. And then the system failed. And there was no data to be collected. The wetlands inside the system had gone completely dry. They had lost all life. And he even told me, he goes, we haven't found any living creature in Chartiers Creek at all since this broke down. So it was a complete and total loss downstream, I think, for almost upwards of a mile. And then we have a picture of the raw A&D going into Chartiers Creek there. And that's a picture of one of the pinwheel cells being completely dry. And then it was fixed, and everything came back. Our macroinvertebrate surveys came back at a much higher rate, at about 11s. And then the year after that, they improved even more up to an index rate of 13. Now, these were high school kids. I mean, they were different class every year. This isn't, definitive data, but it did show that with this system in place, everything was working. When it failed, we had a complete loss of life within the wetland itself, which was huge, and Chartiers Creek lost a lot of wildlife. And then as soon as it was fixed, everything came back. Now, our original budget was about $588,000 when we quoted it, and it was bid out. And then we had 3 amendments totaling more than that. So it ended up being $1.2 million, but I think it still turned out to be a success. We got a large passive treatment system back, stream miles back, and the reason that the AMLER fund was really a good choice for this was because at the time this happened, it was not in a qualified hydrologic unit. So we weren't able to use our Pennsylvania set-aside funding to do this. And for such a big project on short notice, it's really hard to get funding together. So we had this AMLER funding started out, and then once we found out that there were 2 mine pools feeding this discharge and not 1, we had to set up the foam injection, and we had to increase our pumping hours, because once we started pumping the mine pool, we didn't want to just stop and let it go for 2 months while we waited for the injection. So we had to pump and costs went up, but we were able to do amendments and get the funding we needed to have this project continue to move forward, without big hesitations. Our project partners for this was Allegheny Land Trust. Tetra Tech was our main engineering firm. The site was originally designed by Head Environmental, and he was also in there helping design some of it too. Howard Concrete came in and did all of our grouting needs for us, and then our own PADEP banner. Thank you very much.